When we see a woman in a religious dressing, we instinctively feel a sense of safety. For centuries, the nun has been a universal symbol of peace, self-sacrifice, and moral purity. We trust them with our children's education, our family's secrets, and our community's most vulnerable souls. We assume that by taking those sacred vows, they have walked away from the dark temptations of the world. But what happens when that veil is used as a mask for a predator? Today, we are looking at 10 cases where the holy turned out to be anything but. These are stories of nuns who used the unquestioned authority of the cloth to hide crimes ranging from massive financial fraud to cold-blooded murder, from the principal betting her students' tuition at the blackjack table to a mother superior who turned her convent into a literal death trap. These accounts prove that a habit can hide a heart of stone. Welcome back to Murder Eyes. Before we begin, I want to ask you, why do you think we are so quick to trust a stranger just because they are wearing a habit? Is it out of respect for the faith, or is it a dangerous blind spot in our society? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Marie Thornton. When we think of a nun in her golden years, we imagine a life of quiet reflection, prayer, and perhaps a modest existence funded by the church. We certainly don't imagine a high-stakes gambler rubbing shoulders with high rollers at the luxury casinos of Atlantic City. But for Sister Marie Thornton, the line between her sacred duties and her secret addiction didn't just blur, it vanished entirely. For nearly 3 decades, Thornton served as the vice president of finance at Iona College, a position that gave her keys to the kingdom and, more importantly, the books. Think about that for a second. This was a woman trusted to manage the lifeblood of an educational institution, a woman who had taken a vow of poverty. Yet, behind the scenes, she was living a double life that would make a corporate embezzler blush. Her method was as simple as it was bold. She would cut checks for personal expenses and then mask them as legitimate college business. It wasn't just a one-time slip-up. It was a systematic, cold-blooded drain on the school's resources that lasted over 10 years. The betrayal here is layers deep. While students were taking out massive loans to afford their tuition, Thornton was allegedly using the school's coffers to fund a gambling habit that saw her frequenting casinos with alarming regularity. The Mother Superior of the finance office was actually a shark in a habit, but as any gambler knows, the house always wins eventually. The turn came during a routine internal audit in 2011. Forensic accountants began to notice strange discrepancies, small threads that, when pulled, unraveled a massive $850,000 hole in the budget. The college, horrified by the discovery, confronted the woman they had trusted for decades. Thornton didn't have a miracle to save her this time. The digital trail of checks and bank statements left her with nowhere to hide. In the end, the woman who spent her life representing the church found herself standing before a judge in a federal courtroom. Marie Thornton pleaded guilty to 1 count of wire fraud. Due to her age and failing health, she avoided the maximum prison sentence, but was ordered to pay back the full $850,000 and was placed under home confinement. She left the college in disgrace, a stark reminder that the most dangerous deceptions often come from those who claim to be walking the path of righteousness. Mary Margaret Kruper and Lana Chang. Mary Margaret Kruper and Lana Chang were the faces of St. James Catholic School in Torrance, California. For nearly 30 years, Kruper served as the principal, the stern but beloved matriarch, while Chang was the dedicated 8th grade teacher. Together, they represented the bedrock of their community, guiding generations of children with a firm hand and a rosary. Parents trusted them with their children's futures, and the church trusted them with its finances. It was a bond of absolute, unquestioned faith. But beneath the surface of bake sales and morning prayers, a dark irony was unfolding. For over a decade, these two women were operating a sophisticated long-term embezzlement scheme that funneled school funds into a very different kind of temple, the casinos of Las Vegas. Think about the sheer audacity of it. While they were teaching children the importance of the 10 Commandments, specifically, thou shalt not steal, They were allegedly pocketing tuition checks and donations meant for school upgrades and charitable causes. The betrayal wasn't just financial, it was deeply personal. This wasn't a crime of necessity or a moment of weakness, it was a calculated decade-long binge. They didn't just take a few dollars here and there, they siphoned off more than $835,000. While the school struggled with aging facilities and teachers went without raises, the gambling nuns, as they came to be known, were jetting off to luxury resorts and sitting at high-stakes tables, fueled by the money of hard-working families who thought they were investing in their children's Catholic education. Their fatal miscalculation was the belief that their status as nuns made them untouchable. The turn began during a standard audit in 2018, triggered by Kruper's retirement. When the auditors started asking questions about a long-forgotten bank account, the cracks began to show. Kruper reportedly became defensive, and the school's administration realized that the math simply didn't add up. Forensic accounting eventually traced the path from the school's mailbox straight to the bright lights of the Nevada Strip. The legal hammer fell hard. In 2022, Mary Margaret Kruper was sentenced to 1 year and 1 day in federal prison, while Lana Chang's involvement led to similar disgrace and legal scrutiny. In court, Kruper admitted that she had sinned and broken the law, but for the families of St. James, the apology felt hollow. They hadn't just lost money, they had lost their sense of security. The very people who were supposed to be the moral compass for their children had spent 10 years betting those children's futures on the turn of a card. Marianne Rapp. The image of a sister in a convent usually evokes thoughts of silence, service, and a complete detachment from worldly cravings. But Sister Marianne Rapp had a secret craving that the quiet halls of her order couldn't satisfy. For years, Rapp served as an administrator for 2 different rural churches in western New York, St. Mark's in Kendall and St. Mary's in Holly. She was a fixture of the community, the woman who kept the lights on and the books balanced for the faithful. Yet, for nearly a decade, she was caught in a downward spiral that transformed her from a servant of God into a regular at the local casinos. Think about the psychological tension here for a second. Every Sunday, she would sit in the pews and listen to sermons on the dangers of vice and the beauty of sacrifice. Then, and during the week, she would allegedly systematically drain the very collection plates she helped oversee. This wasn't a sophisticated corporate heist. It was a desperate, repetitive betrayal of the elderly parishioners who gave what little they had to keep their local parish alive. The weight of her addiction was staggering. Over the course of several years, Rapp siphoned away nearly $130,000. While the church buildings were in desperate need of repair and community programs were being cut, that money was being fed into slot machines. It was a fatal miscalculation of both her duty and her ability to cover her tracks. In small parishes, money is tight, and people eventually notice when the math doesn't align with the mission. The turn came in 2011 when the Diocese of Buffalo conducted an audit and found a massive, unexplained void in the church accounts. When confronted, the veil of the pious administrator finally dropped. Rapp didn't just admit to the theft, she revealed the depth of her gambling addiction, a compulsion that had completely overwritten her vows of poverty and obedience. In 2013, the legal consequences caught up with her. Marianne Rapp was sentenced to 90 days in jail, followed by 5 years of probation. More importantly, she was ordered to undergo treatment for her addiction and pay back every cent of the $128,000 she had stolen. She stood in court, stripped of her authority and her reputation, a woman who had gambled away the trust of 2 entire communities for the fleeting thrill of a jackpot that never came. Leticia Lopez. In the quiet, sacred halls of a convent in Colombia, the world expects to find a sanctuary of sisterhood and shared devotion. We imagine women who have transcended the petty rivalries of the secular world to focus on a higher calling. But in 2001, Sister Leticia Lopez shattered that illusion, proving that even the most peaceful environment can become a breeding ground for a deadly, deep-seated resentment. Think about the psychological pressure of a closed religious community for a second. When a personality clash or a dispute over governance isn't resolved through prayer or mediation, it can fester in the silence. For Leticia Lopez, the friction with a fellow nun didn't just grow into a grudge, it transformed into a cold-blooded plan. This wasn't a crime committed in a momentary lapse of reason. It was an act that required a chilling level of preparation. The incident was as brazen as it was tragic. Inside the very walls where they were supposed to seek grace, Lopez confronted her rival. But she didn't come with words or a plea for reconciliation. She came with a firearm. In a direct violation of the commandment, "Thou shalt not kill," she pulled the trigger, turning their shared home into a crime scene. The irony is haunting. A woman who dedicated her life to the Prince of Peace brought the ultimate violence into the heart of her own convent. The turn was immediate and undeniable. Because the shooting occurred within the cloistered community, there was nowhere to run and no shadow to hide in. Colombian authorities were called to the scene, and the evidence was straightforward. And despite her religious status and the potential for a scandal that could rock the local church, the state moved forward with the same rigor it would apply to any other homicide. The sentencing delivered a clear message that the law does not stop at the convent gates. In 2001, Leticia Lopez was convicted and sentenced to 14 years in a Colombian prison. The trial pulled back the curtain on the hidden stresses and interpersonal conflicts that can boil over in religious life, leaving a community of faith to pick up the pieces. She traded her life of prayer for a decade and a half behind bars, a stark reminder that the human heart, regardless of the habit it wears, is still susceptible to the most ancient of sins. Sister Sifi. In the quiet, cloistered world of the St. Pius II convent in India, the morning of March 27, 1992, should have been a time of prayer and meditation. Instead, it became the scene of a mystery that would haunt the nation for nearly 30 years. Sister Sifi was a senior nun at the convent, a figure of authority and supposed moral purity. But that morning, a young novice named Sister Abhaya walked into the convent kitchen and stumbled upon a secret so scandalous that Sister Sifi and two priests, Father Thomas Couture and Father Jose Puthrakayal, decided it was worth killing to keep. Think about the psychological horror of that moment. A young woman, just beginning her religious journey, looks for a glass of water and finds her superiors in a position that violates every vow they ever took. Instead of shame or a plea for forgiveness, she was met with cold, calculated violence. Sister Sifi didn't just break her vows, she allegedly picked up an axe. The incident was as brutal as it was brief. To cover up their illicit affair, the group struck Abhaya in the head and dumped her body into the convent's well, hoping the world would see it as a tragic suicide. For years, the official narrative was just that, a young girl who couldn't handle the pressures of religious life. But the betrayal went deeper than the act itself. For decades, the powerful machinery of the church and local authorities worked in tandem to silence anyone who questioned the suicide story. The turn came through the relentless pursuit of justice by a few dedicated investigators and the victim's family who refused to let the case die. However, it took decades of legal battles, suspicious disappearances of evidence, and multiple reopened inquiries. Eventually, forensic experts revisited the crime scene and determined the injuries were inconsistent with a fall. The digital and physical paper trail of the cover-up began to bleed through the cracks. After 28 years of waiting, the truth finally emerged in a Thiruvananthapuram courtroom. In December 2020, Sister Sifi and Father Thomas Couture were found guilty of murder and destroying evidence. The judge was scathing, noting that the victims of the crime weren't just Abhaya, but the entire community's faith in their leaders. Both were sentenced to life in prison. Sister Sifi, who had spent nearly 3 decades playing the role of a holy woman, finally traded her convent walls for those of a high-security prison, proving that while justice can be slow, no well is deep enough to hide the truth forever. Marie Doherty. In the cold, gray corridors of the Nazareth House Orphanage in Scotland, the children were taught to fear God, but they learned to fear Sister Alfonso even more. Born Marie Doherty, she was a woman whose name would eventually become synonymous with a systematic campaign of terror that spanned decades. To the outside world, Nazareth House was a place of refuge for the vulnerable, orphans and children from broken homes who had nowhere else to turn. But once the heavy doors closed, the sanctuary became a prison, and Sister Alfonso was its most brutal warden. Think about the psychological impact for a second. These were children who had already lost everything, looking for a mother figure and a habit. Instead, they found a woman who seemed to find a twisted satisfaction in their suffering. This wasn't just a case of old-fashioned discipline, it was a profound moral betrayal. Doherty oversaw an environment where the most basic human needs were met with violence. The incidents described by survivors are the stuff of nightmares. Children were allegedly beaten for the smallest infractions, force-fed until they vomited, and then forced to eat that vomit. Some reported being held underwater in baths or being scrubbed with harsh brushes until their skin bled. The irony is staggering. A woman who had dedicated her life to the service of the poor was spending her days breaking the spirits of the most helpless members of society. She used the authority of the church as a shield, knowing that in that era, a nun's word was absolute and a child's word was nothing. The turn didn't come from a single slip-up, but from the collective courage of the survivors who refused to stay silent. As the decades passed and the culture of silence around institutional abuse began to crumble, a massive police investigation known as Operation Foinaven was launched. Hundreds of former residents came forward, their stories creating a hauntingly consistent portrait of Doherty's cruelty. Digital records and old archives were unearthed, showing that the complaints had been ignored for years. The sentencing was a long overdue moment of catharsis. In 2001, at the age of 74, Marie Doherty was convicted of 4 charges of cruel and unnatural treatment of children. While her age meant her prison sentence was relatively short, only 24 months, the true justice was the public stripping away of her holy persona. She died in disgrace, no longer remembered as a servant of the Lord, but as the face of a dark chapter in Scottish history where the people sworn to protect the innocent became their greatest tormentors. Birds, Melhenny, McDermott, and Igo. In the 1960s and 70s, the Nazareth House orphanages across the United Kingdom were meant to be bastions of Catholic charity. But behind the ivy-covered brick walls of the Belfast and Derry locations, a quartet of nuns, Sisters Carmel Rose, Mary Eileen, Arthea, and Mary, turned a house of prayer into a theater of cruelty. These women, known to the world as Carol Birds, Eileen Melhenny, Sarah McDermott, and Eileen Igo, shared a bond that wasn't just built on their vows, but on a shared dark appetite for the systematic humiliation of the children in their care. Think about the dynamic here for a second. This wasn't one bad apple acting in secret. This was a collective, a group of women who validated each other's brutality. When one sister tired of the abuse, another was there to pick up the strap. They created a culture where cruelty was the language of the house. The betrayal is almost incomprehensible. These were women who had renounced the world to care for the least of these, yet they treated the orphans like subhuman obstacles to be broken. The incidents reported by the survivors are visceral and haunting. The Nazareth House 4 didn't just utilize corporal punishment, they engaged in what can only be described as psychological warfare. Children were reportedly beaten with hairbrushes, locked in dark rooms for days, and subjected to public shaming that left scars much deeper than any physical blow. One of the most chilling ironies was their use of religious ritual as a weapon, forcing children to pray for forgiveness for the very sins that were often just the natural reactions of terrified, lonely children. The turn came decades later, during the Historical Institutional Abuse (HIA) inquiry in Northern Ireland. For years, these women believed their tracks were covered by the passage of time and the weight of the church's reputation. But they made a fatal miscalculation. They underestimated the power of the digital age and the collective memory of those they had wronged. As survivors connected online and shared their stories, the similarities were too consistent to be ignored. The hush that had protected the order for half a century finally shattered. In the end, the weight of hundreds of testimonies forced a reckoning. While the statute of limitations and the advanced age of the perpetrators made traditional criminal sentencing a complex battle, the legal findings were a crushing indictment. The inquiry found that the abuse was systemic and that Birds, Milhenny, McDermott, and Igo were central figures in a regime of terror. Their names were struck from the rolls of honored service and placed forever in the archives of institutional infamy. They lived out their final years not as respected elders of the church, but as the faces of a betrayal that defined a generation of stolen childhoods. Norma Giannini. In the sunny, affluent neighborhoods of Northern California, Norma Giannini was known as a woman of deep faith and high social standing. She wasn't just a former nun, she was a pillar of her community, someone who had dedicated years to the church before moving into the secular world. People looked at her and saw grace, stability, and a moral compass that pointed due north. But in 1980, the mask of the pious neighbor slipped, revealing a woman who viewed human life as something that could be bought, sold, and disposed of for the right price. Think about the sheer cold-blooded irony here. We aren't talking about a crime of passion or a moment of temporary insanity, when Norma Giannini was the mastermind behind a literal contract killing. This was a woman who had spent years studying the sanctity of life and the commandments of God, yet she sat down and coolly negotiated the price of a man's existence. The victim was her friend's husband, a man named Albert Guay. The motive? A toxic mix of loyalty and greed. The incident was as calculated as a business transaction. Giannini didn't pull the trigger herself. She was far too sophisticated for that. Instead, she acted as the middleman, the broker of death, hiring a hitman to execute the murder. She used her reputation as a trustworthy religious woman to stay above suspicion, believing that her history with the church provided her with a permanent get-out-of-jail-free card. It was a fatal miscalculation of her own cleverness. The turn came from an unlikely source, the hitman himself. After the murder, the investigation hit a wall until a tip led police to the man who pulled the trigger. Under the pressure of an interrogation, the professional killer folded, and he didn't just confess to the crime. He pointed the finger straight at the woman in the background. Digital forensics didn't exist back then, but the paper trail of payments and the testimonies of those she tried to recruit created a web that even her religious status couldn't break. The sentencing sent shockwaves through the community. Norma Giannini, the former nun, was convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In court, the image of the saintly woman was replaced by that of a cold, calculating strategist who had traded her soul for the power to decide who lived and who died. She spent the rest of her days behind bars, a chilling reminder that the darkest shadows are often found standing directly in the light. Mariam Soulakiotis. Deep in the Karatias mountains of Greece, the Panagia Peokobounoretisa convent appeared to be a place of extreme devotion and asceticism. At its head was Mariam Soulakiotis, known to her followers as Mother Mariam. To the public, she was a strict holy woman leading a community of old calendarist nuns. But inside those stone walls, Mariam had built a kingdom of terror that would eventually earn her the title, the Woman Rasputin. She didn't just want the souls of her followers, she wanted their earthly possessions, and she was willing to kill to get them. Think about the psychological trap she laid. This wasn't just a monastery, it was a cult. Mariam would scout for wealthy women and families, persuading them to join her convent to find salvation. The entry fee was their entire fortune, homes, jewelry, and savings. Once they entered the gates, the betrayal began. These women weren't greeted with peace, but with starvation, forced labor, and medical neglect. Mariam convinced them that their suffering was a cleansing of the soul, while she sat atop a mountain of stolen wealth. The scale of the incident is staggering. Authorities believe Mariam was responsible for the deaths of as many as 27 people and the theft of over 300 properties. She would reportedly deny tuberculosis patients their medication, telling them that only prayer and the mother could save them. As they withered away, she would have them sign over their estates. It was a production line of death, fueled by a twisted religious ego. The irony is haunting. A woman claiming to be the gatekeeper to heaven was systematically creating a living hell for those who trusted her most. The turn came in 1950 after years of whispers from those who managed to escape or families who never heard from their loved ones again. When the Greek police finally raided the convent, they didn't find a house of prayer. They found 500 women and children living in filth, skeletal, and terrified. Investigators unearthed a massive paper trail of forged wills and forced transfers of property that led directly to Miriam's private accounts. Her fatal miscalculation was the belief that her holy authority made her immune to the laws of the state. The sentencing marked the end of her reign. In 1951, Miriam Sulakiotis was sentenced to life in prison for multiple counts of homicide, fraud, and illegal detention. Even as she was led away, she maintained her persona, claiming she was a martyr for the faith. She died in prison in 1954, leaving behind a legacy as one of the most prolific female serial killers in history. She wasn't a mother to her flock. She was a predator in a veil, proving that the ultimate betrayal is using the name of the divine to commit the most demonic of crimes.